To listen to this Bull Live show, my name is Matt Mulholland, and that is Remington Huggins.
Great seeing everybody this afternoon.
Remington doesn't really know what to do with his hands most of the time, which makes a lot of sense. This is the show that we talk about bullshit in the insurance industry. You get to talk about all the bullshit that you deal with, and we'll get to talk about how you can overcome it, hopefully, or you could ask us weird questions about anything that you really want to. I do have hair under this hat. I just wear the hat because studio lights are very damaging to your scalp.
Yep. And the whole hair under the hat thing is debatable. Just throwing that out there, letting everybody know.
I have hair somewhere on my body anyway, and not just my face. So today's episode is actually a very good one. We've got someone in the wings right now named Rachel Adams, and Rachel is an instructor for the IICRC Council, which I meant to write down what that acronym stood for, and I don't remember what the hell it was. But, they have standards for water mitigation, remediation type things. They're actually writing a standard for fire that eventually will come out. Maybe, hopefully one day will actually come out and not just be promised. We'll see. But she's going to be in the wings. And our topic today is how to categorize water. Is it category 1? Is it category 2? Is it category 3? Is there even such a thing as category 1 water when it's talking about a property loss? We'll see right after this.
Man, I love that. I love the bowl.
Isn't it great? Right.
Where did you find that at?
Oh, we made that.
You made that sound?
Oh.
Is that,
I mean, I might have.
You? Yeah.
It might be a sound that I make when I'm excited. Who knows? All right. Without further ado, I hope Rachel is ready. We didn't get a chance to do a sound check with her, so I'm going to go ahead and pull her on. Rachel, can you hear me?
I can. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Perfect.
Hey, I love it when technology works. Great.
It doesn't for us very often, so we're very excited about this. I'm going to go ahead and pull Daniel Rabowski on as well. Let me introduce him real quick. He is a water mitigation guy. Comes from doing a lot of skyscraper type water losses and things, and he is instructing at the National Claims Institute now on interior inspection certification courses. And so I'm about to pull him on because he knows a little bit more about this kind of stuff than I do. And I want to make sure we ask you some intelligent questions because I'm half retarded. Hey, Daniel.
Hey, Matt, Remington, Rachel.
Daniel,
Nice
what's going on?
Been some time. How's everybody today?
Good. We're good.
Tuesday afternoon, listen to this bull. Couldn't be better.
Good.
Ready to rock and roll. We got
Drink in the hand.
There we go.
Rachel, I don't know if Daniel let you know in advance, but we tend to have a drink or two during the show just to loosen things up a little bit. If you'd like to partake with us, that's great.
I wish I could.
Well, it wouldn't be difficult for you to just take a break and run and grab something. I've got the comments up. If you are watching this show and you have any questions for us, feel free to put them in the comments. The point of us doing this live is so that we can answer your questions live. If you don't participate and put your questions in the commentary, then we can't answer your questions. And that's kind of boring because I have good questions, but I'm the only one that cares about the answers to them. You have better questions. You should put them in the comments. Rachel, you are an instructor for IICRC. Before we go any further, what the hell does that stand for?
You had it close. It stands for the Institute of Inspection, Cleaning, and Restoration Certification.
I was not close. No, I was not.
A little bit.
Okay. Well, I feel like you're flattering me at this point. And I've already forgotten what you just said. I don't think I can repeat it now, and you just said it. Yeah, this is terrible.
Okay, that's what it's called, the IICRC. It's easy to remember.
It's way easier. So
just pull it up on your phone.
So you're an instructor. Are you an instructor for all the courses that are available or all the standards?
No, I only teach classes for water, applied structural drawing, the AMRT, which is the applied microbial remediation, and the health and safety, which also includes the OSHA 10 and 30 for general industry.
I didn't even know they did that one.
Yeah.
I'm feeling a little dumb. See, this is why Daniel's on here.
So, and Matt and I have had these conversations, Rachel, where we know that as the newest version of the S500, S550 comes out, like there's going to be some of those parallels in there that include OSHA. Is there anything, I'm going to kind of put you on the spot a little bit, but is there anything really dramatic that you see changing in the newest release that you haven't seen, or you guys have been trying to get in there over the last couple of years that you're finally able to get in there?
Not so much with the S520, which is the mold remediation standard. The S500 was just released last year. And the biggest difference is that's an additional standard in which they have separated the standard out of the book. So basically now you've got the standard and reference guide that are now separate versus having it together. So that's one of the main differences. And again, I think water changes a lot more just because the technology for the equipment is changing. We're learning ways to dry faster. So there's a lot of changes, and especially in some of the language. They did remove the entire chapter from the S500 on indoor environmental professionals. That's not there anymore. So they've made some changes to streamline it better, to make it simpler to use. And by separating it away from the reference guide, that's going to be a lot easier. It's for them to update it on a more regular basis. Instead of trying to update 500 pages, they don't have to update, 250. So
That's still a hell of a task. So you're an industrial hygienist. How did it feel to have indoor air quality professionals removed from the S500? Did you have to get therapy for that?
Not really, because it just made my life a little bit easier because, they stay as far away from having to do any discussions about indoor air quality. They just try to keep it strictly for the remediators. So that's not a bad thing, but they are coming up with an inspection standard. So that's and they've got a lot of industrial hygienists and other people with similar backgrounds on that particular standard. So that's going to be interesting when that one comes out.
And I'm excited to see that one just because, like you said, you're going to see a bunch of different people potentially that work in different parts of the phases. In the class that I'm going to be teaching that Matt was touching on is that intro to if I'm the GC, if I'm a PA, whoever I am walking into that space and I'm identifying that as a water loss, where is that line where I say, okay, cool, I need to bring in that third party to say, no kidding, like this is the category of water. These are the proper remediation protocols that exist within that space. And Rachel, you and I have done that in the past, where I think putting that out there into the industry where people really have an idea of where those lines are is going to be super important and really the basis for that class coming up. So,
well, I think it gets kind of sketchy when we start talking about classification or categorizing water. It gets kind of sketchy. I don't know that there really is a definitive line because there's just so many variables and it's left up to interpretation. The contractor on day one, when they're on that loss, and they're the ones that are establishing the category. When you bring somebody like me in from like JS Held, where I'm coming in after the fact 6 months, I'm not there to negotiate the category of water because all bets are off by now because everything's changed. So the contractor getting it right, because they're the first ones that are on the loss, them getting that right is important.
But that also evolves very quickly too, right? And I know you and I have had this conversation in depth where if I get in the day after a hurricane hits or a day after pipe breaks or whatever, the categorization of water is going to evolve based on the verbiage, right? And I think a lot of times the push from the carrier's perspective, and when we see the third parties come in, there's that massive shift from, it seems like a relatively easy shift from Cat 1 to Cat 2. And then a massive shift from Cat 2 to Cat 3. And then when we look at the estimating and scoping side of that, there's not a big delineation between Category 2 and Category 3 from the line items that you would use to actually scope those things out. And that usually becomes a pretty hefty topic of conversation, especially once the words Category 3 have been uttered. Right.
Let's set a baseline real quick. There's definitely quite a large audience that I have that probably doesn't recognize the difference between Category 1 and Category 3 water. Can we describe those real quick before we go any further?
In like the layman's terms possible?
Yeah. I don't need exact IICRC language.
Yeah. Go ahead, Rachel.
I was going to say Category 1 basically means it comes from a source that does not pose a substantial risk to occupants being exposed to it or whether they consume it. Examples might be like supply lines that rupture. Category 2 has a significant amount of contaminants that has a possibility of making the occupant sick. And you get into Category 3 where the water is grossly contaminated, may contain pathogenic, toxigenic, or other agents that could cause adverse health reactions to people if they consume it or they're exposed to it. So now you're talking things like sewage. You're talking things like any water that comes up from beyond the trap. It could be a Category 1 or 2 that's left unattended over time.
And that's the big one.
But there is no time frame of determining when does that change.
Well, and we see it a lot where the general consensus is this 72-hour window.
But that's bullshit. That's not there.
I don't
They took that out of the standard. It's not even
She's on the right show.
That's not been on the standard for a long time because people were taking those hours and those days literally. And I've been on jobs where as soon as the water touches the surface because of the conditions, it's Cat 3, period. Mm-hmm. It's a hoarder house. And I've been in jobs where it sat for 5 days and they still came in and did in-place drying and everything was fine. All the PRVs passed, perfectly.
So it says that microbial growth could occur within 48 to 72 hours, which is weird that there is a range there anyway. But microbial growth might not necessarily be enough microbial growth to pose a health hazard. And if you are able to stabilize within a certain amount of time, then it wouldn't be an issue anyway. But so one thing that you said when you were identifying the categories of water, you said it comes from, or the source of the water is a clean water source, but the source of all of those categories could actually have been a clean water source at some point. So it can definitely change. So what do you think is the difference? Is the material that the water flows through building materials? Could that change it to a Category 3 from a Category 1?
Possibly. And here's the problem we're facing is if I call it Category 3 and I've done no sampling, no testing, and I have no data to back that up, and I'm telling a contractor to go in and rip out and gut an entire building, which adds up to, it could be millions of dollars worth of building materials that we're remediating or removing. And how do I support that recommendation? Just because it's my opinion, just because of what I saw? So I'm really trying to encourage people to take more of a stance to get the data to support that. Because I've been questioned. I mean, it was a pretty ugly scenario in Louisiana.
Is a contractor supposed to have testing done to determine if it's a Category 1, 2, or 3, or can they make the call?
Well, a lot of them are making the call without any data to support it. I mean, and this is the kind of how they're looking at it. If it is floodwaters, any water that travels across the surface of the ground can have anything in it. Okay, but the problem is all we're testing for is bacteria. But there could be pesticides, there could be herbicides, there could be a lot of other contaminants. Nobody's testing for that. And if we actually did the testing for the full gamut of what could possibly be in that water, every job would be a $10,000 or $15,000 sampling bill. And I probably wouldn't get paid for that. The insurance companies are going to jump up and down, but yet, they're going to question when they call it a Category 3 because there's a huge difference between a 2 and a 3. There's not much difference between a 1 and a 2.
Which is crazy when you roll back to my statement from the scoping perspective. Right? When you look at the platforms that exist for scoping, Xactimate, Symbility, and RS Mains, there is a massive difference from Cat 1 to Cat 2. There is a very small difference.
No, you got it backwards. It's backwards. There's no difference. There's very little between 1 and a 2. The only difference between a Category 1 and a Category 2, Category 2, they're telling you to pull the pad. You're still cleaning the carpet. You're still doing in-place drying.
Let me clarify. I'm talking about the line items specifically. Now, the use of those line items, I agree with you 100%.
Okay, I'm with you.
I'm saying that the line items that exist, if somebody who is unfamiliar with the space was to jump into any one of those platforms and just start typing the words Cat 3 and plugging line items in because they don't understand exactly what those mean, there isn't a massive difference between Cat 2 and Cat 3 within the estimating software. The use of those line items, I'm with you 100%. Yeah.
So there's a lot of consensus that if water traverses through any kind of building materials, especially if it comes from a roof, is rainwater considered a Cat 3 water source? Rainwater? No. But what if it comes from a hurricane or a tornado?
Well, the standard says if it's wind-driven rain from a hurricane, tropical storm, or other weather-related event that may or that can carry trace levels of contaminants, then it's Cat 3. Okay, well, how do we define that?
Is it always Cat 3 if it's coming from a hurricane then? Are you saying that it should be identified to have those trace elements first?
Well, I'm just telling you what the standard says. It said it could,
Sure.
it includes but is not limited to, and then it lists that specific example. So
Right.
if we have wind-driven rain from a hurricane that's being driven through, let's say, some flashing in a ceiling, I guarantee you they're not dropping that ceiling and cutting it out, or they shouldn't be. But the standard gives the possibility. Well, it could be, but it might not be. So the play on words, the trigger words there are very loosely used, and it kind of could be interpreted a number of ways.
And we do. We see those a lot from the contractor base, especially contractors who are not true mitigation companies, right? Where they come in and they say, oh, well, I heard that 72-hour window. Once it hits 72 hours, it's all fucked at that point, right? The other one is, oh, well, it passed through building materials. It's got to be Cat 3. I've heard. God, I mean,
what building materials would make it Cat 3?
I like to say this, Matt. I see these like arguments all the time where if they say it's a storm created opening, this water more than likely hit asphalt shingles, went through the attic where it went through the insulation, and then went into the drywall where you're actually seeing the interior leaks. And that's where I see a lot of arguments of what category that type of water loss is. I see that a lot. And I'm wondering to the experts, what would you categorize that type of loss?
Go ahead. You first.
Oh, well, so God, that's a loaded question.
I know, right?
Okay. Would you need to like test it? Like what would give you all the facts that you need or evidence to determine if it's a Cat 1, 2, or 3?
So let's say this. So obviously Rachel and I are on different perspectives here. So one, she is an absolute expert in this space. I'm the let's tiptoe up and figure out when to bring those experts in, right? So walking into that space, I also know that a carrier is not going to want to very upfront pay for those costs for that testing. So does the testing need to be done? Yes. So again, it depends on the type of like what cost. Are we talking a hailstorm that just smoked through the decking and that water intruded that way? Are we talking a hurricane, tornado, whatever it is? So those are all different. But I know that at some point, if I'm standing in that space and I see water that's protruded different materials, and I don't know what some of those materials are, and like we were talking with just the hurricane rains, right? Like we have no idea what came through, whether it's pesticides or any of that stuff. So I'm going to call an industrial hygienist. And you can look back at so many of my claims that I've run where I walk in and I'm like, yep, this bitch is soaked. Let's call an IH and let them run the test, let the test bill come in, submit it to the carrier and do that argument that way. I want that data. I want that no shit. These are the items that are in that water or in that moisture or in that soaked piece of material or whatever it is before I'm advising that anybody within the claims process to say, yep, this is Cat 1, this is Cat 2, this is Cat 3. I've been in enough of them that I can make an educated guess, but it's still a guess, right? I want somebody who has those credentials to be able to identify what those things are. And I want that to be a third party. I don't want that to be me. I don't want to be the one stamping off on it and saying, yep, this is what it is. I want somebody.
Do you have a stamp?
Huh? No, I don't.
Do you have a stamp?
No, I want somebody with a stamp.
Oh, okay. So you never stamp anything.
No, remember, Matt, I've told you 100 times.
Just making sure.
I
was confused there for a second.
No,
I never got my stamp. When I got my WTRASD, where's my stamp?
You don't get a stamp for that.
I did not get a stamp. You have to have a license for that. An industrial hygienist license, that's no joke. That's something that takes quite a bit of doing to get.
CIH, not your regular IH, CIH.
Really?
Oh, that's a whole other topic of discussion.
Yeah.
Do you get to slap around the regular IHs? Just because you're certified?
Go find anybody who works for just an industrial hygienist and ask them how they became an industrial hygienist. And then ask the same question to a certified industrial hygienist.
So do you know the difference between the two?
You're awesome and they suck.
Because I'm not a CIH. I'm only an industrial hygienist. I have my certification through a different avenue.
You set me up.
The difference between an IH and a CIH is the CIH has a minimum of 5 years experience and they passed an exam.
Yeah.
It does not mean that they actually have more education, background, knowledge, or experience than an industrial hygienist, just because they opted not to take that exam or go that route. And again, the industrial hygiene, so the exam that's offered by AIHA, guess how many questions are on that exam? And it's like a 4-hour test. Guess how many questions are on it that deal with mold?
I want to know the answer to this. I don't know the answer to this one.
Zero.
Really?
Really? How many questions
deal with
categorization of water? Zero.
What do they talk about?
Because there's so much more that's involved with industrial hygiene. I mean, there's ventilation
air
design,
quality.
there's safety, there's air quality. There's one little bitty part.
Yeah. So, but the job that you perform in your capacity has a lot to do with water mitigation type services, and an industrial hygienist might do so many more different things. Or certified.
They might be in an industrial setting where they're monitoring workers for chemical exposure.
Right.
So when you look, it's like the Texas general contracting laws, right? So there's a lot of people who live in that space who kind of arbitrarily give themselves that title. There's somebody above them that's stamping off on their shit. There's somebody that's vetting what they're saying before protocols are released and stuff like that. So it's like a pharmacist and a pharmacy tech, right? There is somebody who's doing the legwork a lot of times, and they're submitting that information for review. And so,
does that make you a minion?
Who, me?
Anyone that's like the pharmacy tech, is that the minion of the pharmacist? I don't know. Yeah. I don't know what a minion is.
Sure.
I saw a yellow guy on the TV earlier, and now I'm stuck on minions all day.
Yeah.
Hey, we got some questions from the audience I'd like to put up on the screen and see if we can get this. If I overflow a toilet, is that a Cat 3 loss?
I like this question. I love this question.
You know what? The cop-out answer of it depends is hard to work with scenarios.
So I actually, this is a really good segue, right? So it speaks to the fact that a lot of people, even that live in that space, don't know, right? So I had a JS held individual that I met on site on a property here in Fort Worth that we had an IH categorized everything, protocol, everything. We had the full packet, right? And the first thing that he asked me, and I love bringing this up because I've never gotten Rachel's opinion on this, so I'm interested to hear what your response will be. He said, well, where's your fecal screen? And I said, we didn't do a fecal screen.
Right. Because he was looking to see if it was sewage related with some kind of a pathogen possible response. And that was the only thing that would make him think it was category 3.
He said the only way to make it a Cat 3 water loss is if there's feces in the water. And I said,
think that's true, Rachel?
Well, what it says is if it's beyond the trap, then it's category 3.
Look, all toilets are traps.
Just saying, if it is on the room side of the trap,
don't put the seat up, you're stuck. It's a trap.
If it's on the room side of the trap, it's supposed to, with no contaminants, then it's supposed to be a category 1.
Now, this particular loss had nothing to do with toilets.
Wait a minute. No.
Yeah.
It's supposed to be a category 1.
If it's on the room side with no contaminants, right?
Let's assume then that the toilet has been cleaned recently, I would hope, because my toilet turns yellow over time with this sludge in it.
That's probably your hard water, but regardless.
You think it's hard water? It's definitely not my urine that sits in there, because if it's number 1, it's fine. If it's number 2, you got to flush, right? I don't know what the acronym is.
I don't know that everybody lives by that rule, Matt.
Nobody lives by that rule. It's just me.
Everybody lives by that rule.
Okay.
But in this particular loss, Rachel, it had nothing to do with toilets. This was a part of the freeze, and it was part of a freeze claim. These were pipe breaks, and I just moved away from that, Matt.
Yeah, I know.
That was his sticking point.
What if it's on this side of the trap, but there's a turd floating there? I mean, that's definitely not Cat 1.
That you just changed the scenario.
Yeah.
Okay, so feces.
So, but anyway, that's what they came out.
Sometimes the toilet will have little streaks of turd in it.
What is with you in the toilet?
I like poop.
We're living there, huh?
I'm just saying the before the trap, I don't see how that's category 1. I don't know of anybody that would feel comfortable drinking that. Category 2, I'd be okay with.
Wait a minute,
Wait
a minute. We got to talk about.
Yeah,
exactly. We got to talk about category 1 is the least contaminated of the 3.
It doesn't mean you can drink it.
Not clean water.
Yeah.
It is
it's not clean water.
No.
It's not from a potable source. I thought that's what you talked about.
Absolutely not. It is so we got used to get hung up. This is old language. They used to call it clean, gray, and black water losses. Right? There's no such thing as a clean water loss. As soon as water touches a surface, whatever's on that surface becomes part of the water. Category 1 is the least contaminated of the 3. If you walk into a place and you're going to call it category 1, loss happened from a supply line, you're there within 2 hours of the loss, you extract that water out of Mrs. Jones' carpet, you're not going to drink that, but you're still going to do in-place drying and call it category 1, more than likely.
And the language used to say that it would be harmful to your health if you were to consume it, right?
No.
Or it wouldn't be if it's category 1. Right?
It said it does not pose a substantial risk.
Substantial risk.
It is not clean water. I would not take a cup of that and drink it.
Okay, we're not going to Aaron Brockovich this situation and force anybody to drink anything. All right,
but that's a good point, right? And so I mean, there's a massive difference between water you can drink and water that's clean but not drinkable.
Yep.
Massive difference.
All right, so if you were to though get sick because the loss happened, does that automatically make it category 3?
That's a really open-ended question.
There's Frank Dalton for you coming in
with pink eye. Yeah.
With pink from the cleanup by default cat 3. That's funny.
That's not a bad.
That just means that you weren't wearing the proper PPE, Frank.
That's what that means.
Yeah, no, he was not, and he rubbed his eye way too much without washing his hands or something. But I've gotten a pink eye right after a flood loss by accident.
One of the organisms that actually is most known to be present in category 3 is the adenovirus, which causes pink eye and infections of the eyes and the respiratory system.
I also got cancer. Was that because of that?
I hope not.
Rachel, I appreciate you putting up with our shit right now.
Are you recommending lab results? Are you saying extract but don't demo until confirmed? Should we hold off on demolition and drying until the testing is done?
My opinion, dehumidifiers go in immediately because you're trying to control or stabilize the environment. And this kind of brings us back to lab results. Okay, well, what kind of testing are we using? Because that defines a lot of other parameters. Mm-hmm. You know, a lot of companies are using ATP to qualify categorization of water, and that's just flat wrong on so many levels.
How long does it take to get tests back, typically?
Depends.
Yeah.
If you're doing a culturable plate by PCR, you're probably looking at 48 hours at the earliest.
Okay.
So you would do a dehu even in a situation where the category water might be a category 3 would you encourage encapsulation or containment?
Containment, yes.
Yeah.
Standard even says you should be building containment on Cat 2 and Cat 3 water losses.
Okay. What about tear out? Would you tear out the porous materials while waiting on a category 3 determination?
Depends, because if it comes back and it doesn't have anything that indicates it as a category 3 and you start ripping out building materials, well, what's your basis for doing that?
Would you recommend having testing for asbestos and lead before doing any kind of tear out?
You should. Follow your state requirements.
Get asbestos testing done?
They can do that because it's been they use microscopy, so you can get that back same day if you want to pay for it. It costs more, but
a lot of that comes into state statutes and in people's understanding of when the building was built, because certain states tell you after a certain date. If you know that the building materials were put in after a certain date, it's not required by the state if they are prior. Some states like Oklahoma, I believe, is required regardless. That I don't care if that building was built in 2016. You have to do asbestos testing before demolition is done. Now, is that adhered to and is it enforced? No, but it exists, right? So, the contractors that are going in and doing that kind of stuff have to be able to identify, at least on a general level, what is the minimum that I need to do to start this process if I'm going down that road of lab testing and stuff like that. So,
So
we
John
have contractors
Mulholland,
all the time where we get called in and they've tore out walls and done 4-foot rips and like a whole bunch of shit that did not need to be done. That is a really long question.
I'm going to pause you there, Dana. I want to get to that. I want to get to the 4-foot flood cut stuff. I think that's an important thing for us to touch on. But real quick, this is actually a decent question, and I don't want us to pass up before we get past this conversation. So John Mulholland is a brother from another mother. We're not actually related. We did an ancestry thing, and not so much, as it turns out. Just the same last name. Anyway, the S500 recommends an IEP on every indoor water loss to evaluate these things. Bring in a third-party IEP expert, which gets you the supporting documentation and testing if needed. Drywall compound often contains formaldehyde and acetaldehyde, acetaldehyde. I don't know what that is. Say it again.
It's all the hides. Yeah.
All the hides.
Why are we using so many big words?
Carcinogens. How do you feel about, as an industrial hygienist, how do you feel about making a statement about carcinogens that are in building materials that the water passes through?
I mean, we know that formaldehyde is a carcinogen. Acetaldehyde, I mean, if you look at all the aldehydes, I mean, they're toxic, let's put it that way. But no one's doing testing on that. I mean, typically, if you're going to get exposure to formaldehyde, that's going to be in a gas phase. That's off-gassing. Remember the old FEMA trailers after Hurricane Katrina, where all those people got really sick when the government gave them the free housing? It's because they were loaded with pressboard materials that off-gas formaldehyde. So typically that's good. I mean, unless you're drinking the water, I suppose, but I mean, it's typically a gas. And the standard does not recommend an IEP on every single water loss. They leave it to the discretion of the restorer. So that's that's miscited from the standard. It does not say that.
What if there's a water loss and there's like standing water, and then you set the building on fire so that the water boils? Would it be okay to drink then?
Could be. Depends how long you boil it.
I just fixed everybody's problems. There you go. All right. So if you were to send in a contractor and the contractor makes a determination over category of loss, and then they do a flood cut at 4 feet, and they do it at 4 feet because it's easier to install at that point, and 2 feet might be a little bit more difficult, but it's not really necessary to go all the way to 4 feet because the water line is below that and it's not wet above that. Is that acceptable? You think that's okay to cut out 4 feet as a flood cut?
So my answer to that, I'm only going to have you, if I'm writing a protocol, I'm only going to tell you to remove what needs to come out. I would say the general rule of thumb, and you're not going to find this in writing anywhere, but it's generally accepted that, if it's a sewage loss, you typically go 1 foot beyond the water line that's established using a moisture meter. If it's mold, it's 1 to 2 feet beyond what's visible. I think 2 feet's a little excessive. But, I don't recommend contractors take out building materials with the rebuild in mind. To me, I'm only going to have them remove, because not all contractors do the rebuild. So I have them take out what needs to come out.
I mean, if the rebuilding contractor happens to be a different contractor and they come in and they want to tear out the additional 2 feet and then put it all back in, that might be additional costs associated with it. The original tear out could be higher, but you're right. I mean, would it end up being more costly in the end? Before you take over.
Are you ready for me?
Shit.
You're ready.
I just had a brain fart. I had the best question.
It doesn't matter.
You'll have to pretend I asked it.
So
everybody's very impressed.
Here's my thing, and this is coming from the estimator side of my brain, right? There is a cost associated with a 2 foot rip. There's a cost associated with a 4 foot rip, and the making sure that it's all uniform in appearance, right? So we go back to the NAIC and the general uniform appearance of things, right? So regardless of whether the contractor is the mitigation contractor and the rebuild, or just one or the other, if the mitigation contractor has an approved scope of work that comes in and they do an 18-inch rip, I don't give a shit what the value of that rip is, right? If it follows the protocol that was approved, when the contractor comes back in, the estimator for that project should be estimating the proper means and methods for them to marry those two items together appropriately and the cost associated with those things. Is it easier in 4-foot increments when it comes to drywall? 100%. But it doesn't matter if it was approved at 2 foot, right? Because then they have to approve the proper putback steps for that reconstruction.
I agree.
Remington, can I get a hell yeah?
As long as asbestos testing was done to begin with.
Depends on the state.
Is that not required by the EPA, or at least for commercial? There was a moment where they almost said that everyone that has had to work from home due to COVID created everyone under NESHAP rules automatically. And then the person that was about to write that got fired.
As they should.
Yeah.
I might have gotten them fired.
That's fine. What other questions we got?
Did Remington have a question?
I don't know.
Does this sound right? P Cat 1, Poo Cat 2, PM Poo Cat 3?
Yeah, that's a very elementary version of it. Yeah, sure.
I don't think Poo makes it Cat 2. I think that makes it Cat 3, doesn't it?
Yeah.
That is the Dr. Seuss version of the IICRC right there. There we go. Hey, the biggest battle I have is literally when we there's these water mitigation companies that go in and they are trying to follow the IICRC standard to the T, and they're what they believe is a Cat 2 or a Cat 3, and doing all this work, and then you have the carrier pushing back on it on the back end. Those are just huge fights. Daniel or Rachel, do you guys have any suggestions on how to overcome that? Because sometimes I'm talking, these are 6-figure differences between what the carrier wants to pay versus what the water mitigation company incurred, and ultimately what that policyholder is going to incur. So I don't know if you guys have any suggestions on the best way for water mit companies to, try and avoid that. Or, hey, you got to do what you have to do, or any suggestions for attorneys or public adjusters to help them, bridging the gap between those discrepancies.
Do you want to go, Rachel, or you want me to go first?
Well, I always point out that who's hiring the contractors?
And let's just say this is not a preferred vendor. This is hired straight from the policy.
It doesn't matter if it's a preferred vendor or not. That doesn't even matter, because the insurance company's not signing their paperwork. They're not engaging their services.
Sometimes they do.
The building owner and the homeowner are typically hiring the contractors. I've not had an adjuster sign my contracts since probably back in 2006.
So when he's saying preferred vendors, he's talking the carrier, meaning let's just use State Farm. They're saying ServPro has a preferred contract, right?
I understand, and but that's not engaging their services. All that means is that contractor is agreeing to charge lower prices to get more work from them. That's all that means. At the end of the day, the job that they're doing is for the building owner or whoever signs their work authorization to engage the services. The insurance company is not doing that. So at the end of the day, if the insurance company is denying things and not wanting to pay for certain items, and the restoration contractor believes that what they're doing is right, at the end of the day, the difference goes back to the building owner or the homeowner. They pay that difference.
So, and this is a good opportunity to talk about this. And I say all your eyebrows go up, Matt, is the two of us being PAs and the lawyer that are all on this side of this. What we see a lot of times is those vendors, right, being brought in, being the preferred vendors within underneath the insurance company. They know they're getting a consistent flow of work from the carrier, right? And a lot of times that leads to, well, I don't want to do too much in here because I want to continue to be able to maintain that contract I have with the carrier. I agree with what you're saying. In application, though, we see it so often where we end up having to engage guys like Remington to say, hey, this contractor came in, they were a preferred vendor. This is who the adjuster that came out to the job said, hey, you need to hire, John's mitigation company to do this work. They half-ass do the work, and then there's subrogation lawsuits and all that. We see that frequently.
Oh yeah, all the time.
I get what you're saying. In practicality, though, unfortunately, it doesn't work that smoothly.
Let me say this. A work authorization is not a contract.
That's correct.
So if the only thing that the policyholder or the building owner ends up signing is a work authorization, then they're not the ones really hiring that contractor.
When is the last time people listening to your show? When's the last time an insurance company signed a contract to engage their services and agree on the price? Because that is different than becoming a preferred vendor. Those are two completely different things.
You're saying like
My
right
contract?
What I'm saying, if I want to be on a preferred vendor program, basically I'm agreeing to special pricing for that insurance carrier, right?
Yep.
Right.
Right. But when it comes time for me to show up to do the job, the insurance company is not signing my contract. The homeowner is signing the contract.
And
But there isn't a contract most of the time. There's a work authorization, which isn't a contract. And then
Well,
the policyholder doesn't make the payment, even though it's their benefits. They have no idea how much is being paid to this contractor. They have no right to hold back some money to make sure the contractor does the right job. So in a very real way, the carrier is really hiring that contractor, regardless if there's another contractor between them. The only contract that exists, because the work authorization isn't a contract, the only contract that exists is that preferred vendor contract more often than not. So who really is hiring them? Who really is liable for their work? It's a conundrum, and it's a big problem in the industry.
What does Remington say? Because you're the lawyer.
No. What I was saying is they have a direction to pay that they have the homeowner or policyholder sign off on as well, where the proceeds don't go to the policyholder directly. They'll go to Service Master or Serve Pro or whatever preferred vendor. I see that a good bit. That's all.
Yeah, and you also have companies like Liberty Mutual who they refuse to do that because their contract is with the policyholder and they send the check directly to them. So it's only if you have a carrier that acknowledges and is willing to allow that, will they have a direction of payment. But if you have a contractor that's not using a contract and they're only using a work authorization, shame on them. To get paid, that's their issue.
To be honest, I've never thought of that as being an issue with that contractor. I've always assumed that that was part of the program, that this is the only thing they're supposed to get signed.
Because that's a lot of times the way that it's presented to the insured from the carrier's representative, whether that be a field adjuster or whoever. So
that contractor should be presenting a contract, and if they fail to, then they shouldn't get paid at all.
That's right.
They shouldn't even work on the house.
Because the contract is the binding document that authorizes them not to just be there like a work authorization. Work authorization does. The contract is the direction of payment. What happens if you do default on the contract? That's all the language. And the contractor should be having either two separate documents or a lot of them will put it together. The work auth and the actual contract will be one.
Yeah.
But that comes from the contract. That doesn't come from the insurance company.
So
I've never seen that happen.
But
that makes sense.
The discrepancy here is that.
What do you think, Remington? As a lawyer.
Yeah, let's ask Remington.
This is definitely a lawyer question. I don't know you're not a contract lawyer, but you got to know more than we do.
Policy is a contract. So.
Right.
Sick burn, bro.
Yeah. But no, continue. I know what you're saying.
Well, if the contractor doesn't provide that contract for the policyholder to sign off on, is that the contractor's fault or is that the carrier's fault? Does the carrier, as a part of the program, should they put in writing that the contractor should have a contract with the policyholder? I've seen some of the language in some of these contracts for the preferred vendor networks, and none of that really stipulates that they should be doing that kind of a thing.
If there's a third party coming in, so it's the policies with the policyholder and nationwide. If there's a third party coming in to do some type of work that wasn't agreed upon, that was in that policy, I think there needs to be another contract signed. I agree. I think there needs to be with the policyholder and whoever's doing that work. Matt, because you're in Florida right now, I know right to repair is more prevalent in Florida than Atlanta. Are they having that homeowner sign off on the contract with the right to repair contractor? Because I don't see them in my files if they are.
So if they're choosing the right to repair in the policy, then they are choosing the carrier is choosing to make the repairs. So they do own the contractor. And so they would have the contract with the contractor. If they're giving them an optional repair or a managed repair type program option, and the policyholder chooses the option, then technically the policyholder is supposed to be hiring the contractor. But more often than not, it's still just a work authorization that's presented to them, and they have no idea how much money is going out. They don't know how much of coverage A is being paid out. They don't know how close they are to their policy limits at any given time. Right. It's really kind of an issue. But if it is the contractor's fault, which, to be fair, I've never thought of it that way, and I think Rachel might be right. That is a big issue.
I'm right. I'm telling you, I'm right.
So let me.
You can ask the Ed Crosses of the world, the industry. That's what they specialize in, and I'm right.
No, you are 100% right. However, in application, in the field, at John Smith's house in North Park, Texas, it does not get conveyed that way to the insured. The insured is instructed or directed to use XYZ company.
That's a different issue.
Yes. So that's
very true.
That's where I was trying to get everybody. I know everybody.
That has nothing to do with contracts, but what I disagree with is that, if I'm a policyholder and I have a flood in my house, I should be able to hire any contractor I want because I'm signing their contract. So to be made to feel like I have to use a per vendor from the insurance company, or else they will refuse to cover all the damages because I'm not using somebody out of their preferred vendor list. To me, that's where I struggle.
Right.
They have that in
everybody here agrees. Everybody
in Florida, they have that in the managed repair options. The policies actually, they remove limitations in the policy if you use their optional right to repair. If they offer it to you and you choose that option, then maybe the $10,000 cap on water losses goes away, or a deductible might be paid for. You don't have to pay your deductible. So with that optional managed repair program or something along those lines, the policyholder does gain a benefit on top of it to use one of the preferred vendors. And that's something that's happening heavily in Florida right now. And it's a rough thing.
Yeah. So,
and by the way, Matt, they have, 3 inches of water in their house and they've never seen a water loss. They've never been in a water loss. And this person's telling them that, hey, this company's going to come in here. We work with them all the time. They're going to take care of it. I mean, people that aren't used to this, they sign off on it. I see it. So,
these are the same people that call their agent when they need
sign here. We'll take care of it.
Right. Hey, my house just got smoked by a hailstorm. I'm calling my agent because I've gotten insurance from them for the last 30 years. That agent is not incentivized in any way to appropriate a claim the right way. Right. So it is a play against the ignorance of the insured a lot of times. And we are talking about two different things where what Rachel's saying is 100% right. What we are saying on this side is also right, but they're two different things, right? So we're talking about contracts on one conversation, and we are talking about the applicability of how that claim's navigated on the other hand. So
those definitely two separate conversations.
Yes.
Once that contract from whoever it's from is engaged, then the contractor is required to do the right thing, and those standards exist to give them a guideline on what they should be doing. Now, and I'm going to take this question off and come back to it, but why is there some kind of an idea from insurance carriers that everything only takes 3 days to dry? What is that about? Where did that even come from?
Let's hear it. Let's hear it, Rachel. Do you have any idea about that?
That came from a specific franchise that made that claim. And the whole thing was a marketing ploy. So basically, if it takes you longer than 3 days to dry, they just didn't bill you for that extra time. But that came as a marketing ploy from a large franchise to the insurance world, and it kind of got accepted. So instead of the insurance world hearing, well, we're only going to bill you for 3 days, but it may take 7 days to dry. Now it became this whole, you can dry anything in 3 days.
So if my pizza is delivered in 30 minutes, it's free, right?
So that's the unfortunate part.
And that goes into some of the other things, right? Of if they're doing proper remediation, they're doing moisture testing and stuff. They're testing the environment to see what's there. And if they're doing their job appropriately, it might take 7 days. It might take 10 days. You're having a completely different conversation in New Orleans that you're having in Minnesota, right? Yep. The environment dictates so much of that. You couldn't in any fathomable way say, yep, this can all be dried in 72 hours.
Exactly right. And so I've always told the contractors This is why your documentation is so important, because if you're actually giving them all the psychrometric data, you're giving them your dry logs, and you can show how the moisture readings are progressing, and the data shows and demonstrates, is your equipment even working? I mean, you have all that data, and it might take 7 days.
And the contractors worry a lot of times if there's a discrepancy, if there's a dip, or if there's an increase in moisture or a decrease where there shouldn't be, that they're somehow doing something wrong. So they don't want to produce that information. Sometimes the exterior environment changes what you're doing, and that's why you need to have those logs and the psychometric data, so you can walk in there and say, okay, we need to make an adjustment. We need to move this equipment around. We need to change this equipment out. We need to be doing different things to facilitate that drying.
Yep.
All right. Question from the audience from Frank Dalton. If a carrier refuses to do proper cleaning of a dehumidifier, and for some reason the dehu overflowed and there's a Cat 3 water spillage from the dehu, would they be responsible to pay for the Cat 3 water cleanup at that point? I guess 2 questions here. Would an overflow of water from a dehu be a Cat 3 water loss? But if it is, who would be responsible for that issue?
The contractor.
And why would your dehumidifier be spitting out Cat 3 water?
Yeah. After reading that question, it wasn't as good as I thought it was the first time I read it.
I get what he's saying. However, if the contractor's doing if they're monitoring their equipment appropriately, that dehu is not going to overflow, and a dirty dehu is not going to overflow because it's dirty.
So from a policyholder standpoint, Remington, it's definitely not the policyholder's fault that this would have happened. It's definitely the contractor. Would the homeowner's insurance cover this and subrogate against the contractor?
Look, I've seen, this is just a set of facts. I've seen it where a pressure washing company does something and starts a fire. I've seen where somebody is doing gutter cleaning and falls and breaks a bunch of tiles on the roof. It's up to that carrier. To me, the carrier should take care of their client, which is the policyholder. And then if they need to subrogate, then they need to do so. That's why they have, billion-dollar subrogation facilities in these big, corporations, State Farm, Allstate, Nationwide, all that. That's what they do. And there's teams of attorneys hired just to do that. So in my opinion, they should take care of their policyholder. However, there's a lot of times where they don't.
Yeah. And in this particular case, I mean, sure. What is the reason that happened, right? I mean, is it because they weren't out there monitoring the equipment? Was it a faulty piece of equipment? So, if you are upfront and reasonable with what you are doing and your documentation supports the task that you're accomplishing, and there is that anomaly that happens, like a DU takes a shit in the living room, cool, fix it, continue doing what you're supposed to do. And 9 times out of 10, you're playing against the heartstrings of somebody at that point. You're not trying to argue facts. You're saying, hey, this got fucked up and I fixed it. Expect people to be reasonable. Now, do we all know that sometimes carriers are completely unreasonable? Yeah, but so are contractors too. So
no, never. Awkward silence. After the Texas freeze, most people were unable to get mitigation contractors for several days or even weeks due to the number of losses. And considering that the pipe burst and went through building materials and possibly touched rodent feces, has it always touched rodent feces if it goes through insulation? I feel like contractors believe that's true.
This is the question I kind of pinned it earlier. I left off rat feces. I mean, this is really the same exact question. It goes through
roof insulation. There's a lot of rodents in roof insulation. They make their nests in there, but is that always the case? Should you assume that there is rodent feces in it? Should we go digging for rat poop?
So every freeze claim that I ran in Texas last year after the freeze had an industrial hygienist brought in, period. And I let them do their testing, and we worked off of their testing and protocol. So yes, is there scenarios where it is an automatic Cat 3? Sure. I think the term automatic is a little excessive, but because of that lag in time, right? I mean, you couldn't navigate Dallas at all for 2 to 3 days. So this is where a lot of the contractors wrote in on that 72-hour window conversation. They're like, oh, it's 72 hours. It's got to be a Cat 3 because the water's sat here. Well, no, again, your environment dictates a lot of that stuff. So again, maneuvering through a ton of these losses and seeing kind of some consistencies in types of losses, you could assume, yes, that it's Cat 3. The rodent feces particular thing, obviously that changes the dynamic of this entire statement. But, you know, by the time we were able to get to a lot of these losses, almost every single one that I did after bringing in an IH was categorized as a Cat 3. Almost every single one.
Was it Rachel that you brought in?
No.
Did you avoid using Rachel?
I didn't know Rachel at the time.
Darn the luck.
But see, I asked a question earlier because I'm asked this a lot. Like, and I'm not a hygienist. You know, I can't answer that question seriously. Intelligently, I can guess, but I literally have this all the time. So that's why I asked it, and Sandy's asking the same thing pretty much.
I mean, can you pick up impurities from building materials as water migrates through it? Yeah, you can. I mean, but again, how do we classify that? How do we categorize that?
That's
now,
what we're asking you.
What do you call a fire suppression system that releases?
It's not water.
Well, it's got water in it.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
It might, now, depending on where it happens, it might have maybe some methylene glycol in it as a component to prevent freezing. Has it been sitting in those pipes for 30 years, or are they actually discharging it on a regular basis for maintenance? A lot of questions you could come up with.
Are you saying that we shouldn't say water loss? We should say, I don't know, shit water loss or something like that to really just drive the point home when we file the claims?
I don't know what you're talking to. What Daniel said?
So if you're talking about fire suppression system and the different chemicals that are inside of it, you're saying that it might not be a water loss necessarily. It might be something else.
I didn't say that.
Did Daniel say that?
I said what category is it? I think Daniel said that.
What am I drinking right now?
I don't know.
You need to cut back on that.
Daniel didn't say it wasn't a water loss either. So again, that's why I bring in industrial hygienist. I don't know what shit is in fire suppression systems, but I do know from a means and methods perspective that they're supposed to be insulated differently. And the idea that a fire suppression system would burst because of a freeze would tell me that there's water in it, not exclusively antifreeze-ish materials, right? And not, again, I don't know.
But it's a supply line that feeds it, but
yeah,
you may have other things additives added to it.
Right.
How does that change it? Because everyone wants to call it Cat 3, and it may not necessarily be Cat 3. In your fire suppression systems in the southern states, you may not have anything in it because you don't reach below freezing temperatures, or you shouldn't. Like what happened in Texas, that was a 1 in a million, right?
Which sent a massive ripple across the insurance world because they weren't prepared for it.
Yep.
There's been some interesting things that came out of that for sure. So the question, do you think that everyone should follow the IICRC standards? Is there any time that you would want to not follow IICRC?
First off, Neil, what's going on, buddy? Nice hearing from you.
Yes. Before I want to answer Neil's question real quick. Yes, I've literally had a carrier tell me that IICRC only exists in Florida.
Really?
Yeah.
Good for him.
He was a special guy.
It like, again, you just stare at him for a minute and just walk away. Like you're like, okay, I'm done. So anyway, go ahead. I didn't want to leave that one lingering out there because I felt like that was a good one. Is there a time that you wouldn't recommend utilizing the IICRC protocols for? I can't think of a scenario you wouldn't want to.
I think there's going to be, and remember, there's a disclaimer in the front of all their standards that every job is unique, and in some circumstances, you may have to deviate from what the standard states. Common sense should always be used. Negligence is never acceptable. Something along those lines. But there's a lot of times there are limitations placed on contractors that's out of their control, and they have to deviate, or something's going on with the building itself that precludes you from, including everything that the standard would outline as a standard of care. If you have to deviate, then they should be documenting why they have to deviate and what they do instead. Because that way, if it comes back to a lawyer, they're looking at this from a liability standpoint. Now they have a reasoning behind why something changed or wasn't done consistent with the standard.
Which, I'd add to that and say that I would imagine that a life safety issue would trump the utilization of IICRC, right? If I'm coming into a building that was smoked by a hurricane, I'm not worried about whether I'm protocol heavy on the categorization of water loss. I'm worried about the building fucking falling down, right? So, as I said, can't think of a scenario. As soon as Rachel started talking, I was like, oh no, there's some scenarios there. Yeah.
Well, remember, also anything that's regulatory where it deals with safety, that always supersedes the standard, because the standard are guidelines. They're not regulatory.
Ooh, that's a.
So what's the difference
again slower for people who weren't listening? Holy shit!
Yeah. The idea of what a standard is an interesting. Can you describe what a standard is?
Well, let's talk about the standard of care. The standard of care, which is basically what we're supposed to be following in the IICRC standards, basically is the bare minimum that we should be doing as a competent professional that's been established by the standard that was written on a consensus process, right? So there are guidelines that are utilized that give the flow of how a remediation should follow and the components that should be conducted. They are not regulatory. We don't have little IICRC officers coming around to our jobs making sure we're all following the standard.
But OSHA
is regulatory. Yeah. They're not compulsory.
Yeah, I like that. If there's a takeaway from this entire podcast, that's it right there, in my opinion.
Nah, I'm with. All right, real quick. When is the fire standard coming out? Because damn.
Good question. I don't understand what's so difficult about this, but for everybody to get along and get it completed, it is so way overdue and so needed. Yeah. I can't wait for it. Well, I'm already out of the business I've been waiting for so long. What the hell? Sad. Rachel, it's been a pleasure having you on. If you're cool with it, I'd love to invite you back. There's been so much good information that's come out of this, and I still have so many questions. But if I keep talking, then the audience will just disappear. And
this was obviously focused highly on water. I think there's so many different avenues that we can go down with this road. And Rachel, I appreciate you taking some time to jump on here for sure.
Next time let's talk about mold. Next time let's talk mold.
Let's do it.
I love it.
All right. Thanks, guys. Appreciate the time.
All right,
thank you.
Daniel, you're out too. Bam, Remington. That was a good episode, man.
It was. I liked it. There's a lot of things. Hey, here's my takeaway on this at the end. Think if it was a regulation, then all the policyholders O&L coverage would have to come into play, and then there's limits and everything else. So be glad it's not.
It's still better than just a recommendation, and it's still better than just an association writing something and saying this is how we do it. A standard does have it's the accreditation behind it. There's someone that's backing that up in order for it to become a standard.
I agree. And it's a standard to decide if a company has been negligent or not. Did they follow the professional standard that is in that field? So I get it. I loved it. That was great. I learned some key points. I know if everybody listened, they did as well. Those are two highly intelligent water mit individuals for sure. Water loss individuals. How about that?
Water loss individuals. They're lost in the water. I think this is one of those episodes that a lot of people are going to have to go back and listen to, especially if the water side of things, or trying to get into the water side of things and trying to figure out how things go. NCI does have an interior residential water loss course coming up on July 11th, if you guys are interested in that. That was Rachel Adams, and she is an industrial hygienist and a certified I have her listed for next week too. No, did I do it wrong? I did something wrong. I was going to say who was coming on next week, but honestly, that's not going to work out very well because I have her listed as next week as well, and I don't think she's actually coming on. So that's not going to happen. I don't know who's going to be on next week. It might be one of those bullshit episodes for all I know. But we'll invite Rachel back if you guys think that that was worthwhile. I think there was a lot that was there, and we didn't even get into some of the fun stuff that I really wanted to get into, which was, whether or not you can really cut asbestos drywall at a stud. I really wanted to ask that question since I've had so many claims that go along those lines.
Matt, I think asbestos should just be one specific episode.
We need an asbestos episode.
Same with mold.
I think that's true.
I think we should separate them because I think there's a lot of misinformation out there, and it'd be great to inform a lot of individuals, including myself. I know it'd be a learning session for me as well. If
we could get the Nessie guys to be on for the asbestos one, now that might be a terrible idea. I might beat them up too much, but God, it'd be fun. So Steve Badger was asking to be on the show. Should we let him on?
Let's do it. Can't wait.
What should we talk to him about?
Let me think about it.
Yeah. I think that'll be an interesting one. I have to reach back out to him to get him on the schedule. But if you guys want to put in the comments what we should talk to Steve Badger about, I'd appreciate it. Either way, I'll see you guys next Tuesday at 6 p.m. where we'll be back on for Listen to This Bull Live.
Take care.
Oh, by the way, buy some shirts. Listen to thisbull.com.